The White House has said to stop using C and C++. They didn't really, right? But that's what everybody is memeing about. So if you don't know, we're going to get technical for just a moment here, okay? C and C++ are programming languages, and they're designed for performance first. I mean, for performance and to get you as low as possible to the machine without you having to dive down into assembly, which is like, you know, the lowest that you could possibly go. Obviously, it's not exactly the same as being as low down to the system as you possibly can. Realistically, it's just layers of abstractions on layers of abstractions, right? But it works. It works really well. It's used to make very high performance things like games or like, I don't know, what else needs to be fast? And the White House officially put out a statement this month, about a week ago, I think. Again, I've been sick for 2 weeks. We need to move away from stuff like that. We need to move towards tools and languages that are much less liable to cause certain issues that these languages do. The simplest example that I can tell you is like this idea of like taking user input and just doing something with it and just like keeping it somewhere, right? So it's like a 5-line program to take user input, and if you do it the naive way, you immediately run into this issue where if you type too many letters, or if the thing that you're storing it into isn't large enough, it doesn't hold enough space in it, what ends up happening is that you can just cause a buffer overflow, and then people can just rewrite memory to do anything. This has some interesting uses. There are actually quite a few practical uses for this. You may not know this, but I think it was Jack X Racing, I believe. What they had to do was they had to do a buffer overflow in their own game through their online notice system, and they would write code to like write arbitrary code like into your game so that it would patch your game for the rest of its time. It's also used for things like game mods and stuff. So this Monday we're going to be exploring a lot of different game mods that use this technique very, very well. In fact, all of the mods that I'm going to show you on Monday are basically made using the technique of just gaining access to any random portion of your computer and just writing whatever code that they want. And that's good, right? Where it isn't good is when it comes to your bank account. Where it's not good is when it comes to systems like your hospital, records of your healthcare and stuff like that. Where it doesn't work well is when you need to deal with, you know, government systems. Or even when you use like a third-party service. Like imagine you just use Amazon, and all of a sudden your credit card is stolen, right? You might be wondering, okay, well, what the hell happened? Well, usually, I think it was a study done by Google, Microsoft, and some others. The summary of it said like somewhere around 70% of all issues come from memory issues. In general, bugs involving handling of memory were like 70% of all the reasons why CVEs exist. And a CVE it's I forget what the actual term means. How do I say this? It's an exploit that we know exists, that they've assigned a name to and a severity. So it might be high priority, where it's like, okay, well, if you use this service, just change all your passwords because it's all gone now. Or low priority, like, okay, if you use the service, you better move in like 5 years because somebody might show up at your door, right? And so the White House, in a very weird move, I don't really know why they did this, but it also kind of makes sense if you think about it, has said that we need to start moving away from things that are quote unquote difficult to use and lead to these issues and move towards things that are much more guaranteed to be safe, right? It's not saying outright like we need to do it for all of them. It's not also outright saying that we need to do it now, but it's saying if you have a choice and you have the ability to choose and you're able to make the right assessment call, we need to move away from using things like memory unsafe languages towards things that are safer and easier to use and less likely to run into these issues for the sake of, you know, moving towards a future where stuff doesn't break all the time and people's stuff doesn't get compromised all the time. My theory is this is in response to a lot of the things that have happened recently. Within the past like a couple months, there's been a lot of different like ransomware groups that have sprung up, that have died, but that have actually taken a lot of different companies by storm into like ransom. And it's been a big issue for like a long time, but it's only really started to become like a huge major, I think, a sticking point because it's starting to like affect like the bottom line of the entire country. I'm pretty sure. Because if you look at like how influential tech is now from like a pure financial sense, tech brings in a lot of money and tech has a lot of different things that it has tendrils in. And so it's important, I think, from the perspective of the government to sort of like try and get some sort of action going towards moving to a much safer future, because ultimately the bottom line of the country that they govern is like kind of tied to it, right? Like if Apple falls tomorrow, I don't really want to think about what would happen, but it wouldn't necessarily be good nor bad, but it would definitely be more on the bad side than like good. I think. Like, there's just so much money wrapped up into it that it would be kind of like wild. Again, this is a very weird statement to make because up until now, it's been very Wild West, right? Within technology, at least, it's been very Wild West. People just kind of use whatever they want, whatever they need to. People just do whatever they need to get the job done. And it's usually by external factors that we adjust what we do and we move towards something better, right? There hasn't really been much of a time when the government has had to step in to be like, this is how you should do it. Software development in general has been very, very laissez-faire, let's say. It's been very, very like, even though you have to have a certain type of degree in Canada, for instance, to be like called an engineer, in America you can just call yourself a software engineer. There's no real qualification for it. You can call yourself a software developer here, and you're effectively equivalent to an engineer as well. And there's no real need to go to schooling. There's no need to go into ethics classes. Like there's literally no qualifications for this role, and yet this role has sort of like become one of those things that has, you know, become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Probably, you know, maybe trillions. I'm not really sure. I'm not really good with the finance side there. But it's a lot of money that this industry sort of pulls out of its ass every day. It's surprising that we haven't had any sort of like real standards for most of what we do, except for in certain domains, right? But even in those domains, the standards that we have are usually defined by some legal or whatever system that was there beforehand that happened to apply to whatever we did technically, right? So for instance, in Canada, we have a system called, it's like your privacy stuff, right? Like HIPAA, I think it was called. Basically, nobody but you and your doctor can actually see your like stuff, and it's supposed to be encrypted at like rest. It's supposed to be like taken very good care of. And for the most part, the laws mostly applied, and then they had to add some amendments for like encryption and stuff like that, make sure that it was safe on, you know, transit. But for the most part, it's been a system that's been there in healthcare since beforehand. For your financial stuff, mostly the same thing. But where it gets like tricky is when you leave those very highly regulated domains. When you get into the stuff that's like very, very new, right? Giving your credit card to Amazon, there's nothing stopping you from getting it stolen. Even giving you a full address to like say Uber Eats or something, right? Imagine you do like a food delivery and you give your full address and your credit card and stuff. There's actually nothing stopping them from implementing that poorly and just having it be stolen. So at any point in time, some stranger could know where you live, right? And we just give a very high amount of trust to technology to not do that, because I think for a lot of people, they haven't seen behind the veil of like what happens. But I'm gonna tell you right now, a lot of the places that deal with technology and handle your information and like do stuff with your like personal stuff, there's very little in the way of like security and safety for the most part. It's usually an afterthought, and it's seen as like a cost center. It's not really seen as like, you know, like a benefit of like any kind. You're really just spending money to like do it, and it's usually checking off checkboxes and like stuff. And usually the people who tell you to like do it also don't really understand. Even the professionals don't really know, because the standards move so quickly that everything kind of like, you know, falls to shambles, right? And we're still learning about what this means. So it's fascinating to see that the White House actually pushed out a statement on it. From the little that I skimmed of it, because I didn't read it in super detail, because I wanted to see, you know, what it was here, like live. It seems like it goes through a lot of different things that it wants to like get people to like think about. Basically, you have two different layers, right? You can either do it from the software side or the hardware side. It wants to do it on like both, and it wants to focus on like ways to measure it in a way that's impactful, which is interesting because it's really hard to measure like security. It's one of those things where it's like, if it works, you won't know. But if it doesn't work, then you also won't know. Because if it's not working, then your stuff is stolen. You won't know until all of a sudden you get like ransomware. But being ransomware is like usually the least of your concern. Being ransomware is actually one of the more rare situations. Usually, the way you find out is you happen to see a log that's like, oh, that's weird. Our database has been accessed like outside of our corporation for like months, and then you don't really know if it's being sold anywhere, but you can make some assumptions, right? So it's hard to sort of measure this stuff, and I'm surprised that the government of all things is trying to put like some kind of stance on it. It's also funny the way that they opened this, okay? So every programmer has been making memes about this, saying that President Biden has now outlawed C and C++, which is, it is funny to think about, right? Like it's just funny to think that President Joe Biden has said, don't use C and C++. Like, what is going on? But President Biden's national cybersecurity strategy outlines two fundamental shifts. Need to both rebalance the responsibility to defend cyberspace. And again, I love how they use the word cyberspace. This is still the funniest term to me, because cyberspace as like a term doesn't feel real, right? Like cyberspace is like the shit that you say in that weird hacking movie, the Swedish one, right? To defend cyberspace and realign incentives to favor long-term cybersecurity investments. It's a very strange document, and we'll just basically skim through it. We won't go over too much in detail, because a lot of it is very boring too. You really ideally want this to be read at like a high level, but I'm not there, and neither are you, and so hopefully your boss is reading this, because this is on them now. Like, listen, if President Biden said I can't use C and C++ and I need to use Rust, by God, sir, I'll do it for the sake of America. And I'm Canadian. Use software and hardware products that consistently place the untenable position of reacting to cyber emergencies. Untenable position of reacting to cyber emergencies. The users. So not the people who are making these things, but usually, and this is something that has been a problem since the beginning of like time with technology, when your credit card gets stolen, it's not the tech company's fault, it's your fault. That's just, in general, that's been the mindset that a lot of this stuff has taken, and that the whole industry has sort of like moved towards, and it's been very painful from an end user perspective, because as an end user, how the fuck are you supposed to fix it? I should be swearing less. There's no easy way for an end user to reach deep behind the system and effectively open the curtains and figure out what's like going on, not just from the perspective of like you need the training and the knowledge to do so, right? Again, though there are a lot of programmers, there's still not enough to where it's like everybody can program, and also just like some people just don't want to do that, right? But also from the perspective of like you can't anyways, because these companies operate in like a level of like disconnect from like what you normally would be able to like do, to the point where you have to go through like a million bits of like red tape to get anything done, right? As just a pure consumer, right? Like imagine all the times you have to go through even to something as simple as like a phone call to be like, hey, my credit card was stolen, I only ever use this card on your service. That means there's something wrong. And as you're saying it, the chatbot, on the phone is like, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. Please try again later. Bye-bye. And it ends the call. Like shit like that, right? The responsibility has fallen to the end user too much. And I actually agree with that assessment that end users bear the brunt of our mistakes as developers, but we also don't give them any of the tools to resolve it. It's interesting. Responding on a crisis by crisis basis often leaves them on their heels, and those securing the systems on the front line should not be expected to bear the full weight of this burden. So even the people who are internal, who are trying to secure these systems, they themselves should not be bearing the full brunt of it. No matter how good your IT team is, or no matter how good your cybersecurity department is, they will never be able to work well enough to cover up for the fact that the software just has fundamental issues that causes some serious problems to happen, right? At a lot of places, what I've seen is that they throw stuff over the wall. So it's like I make the thing, I throw it over the wall, and then you have to figure out what to do with it. And that's been like a major issue since like time. It's so annoying that there are entire paradigms of like work that have been developed, and also tools that have been developed to lessen the amount of barriers between a developer and like the end operations person, such that they've effectively become the same person through DevOps, such that they can take full ownership of whatever the hell it is that they've made, and they don't have to throw it over the wall and just tell other people to like deal with it. The intense reactive posture demanded by the current status quo reduces defenders' ability to prepare for the next wave of incoming attacks. And this is also very, very true. We can only really react to things as it is right now. And reaction is always sort of like, until it happens, that's when you do something. But this just sounds to the fact that no software vulnerabilities is a complex systems problem. And I would also argue, just in general, the fact that the amount of knowledge that you need to mitigate this stuff is like very, very deep, very, very specialized, and very difficult to learn as a layperson, even in terms of you being a software engineer. So you being deep into software doesn't mean that you're going to be good at understanding what makes a security problem work. It's kind of like, why expend all that effort when you can make like, half a mil by making some random web app, right? The current ecosystem does not sufficiently incentivize the investments required to secure the foundations of cyberspace. Since 2021, the Biden-Harris administration has taken major action, starting with, and I still don't know why they call it this, but executive order. It sounds like a Star Wars thing. I don't know why they call it this. Maybe like naming schemes have to be cool in general for people to want to do them. Maybe it's because I've seen too many like sci-fi things that have co-opted that like term to the point where like it sounds more cringe and more funny to me than it does something serious, right? Again, this is like Order 66. Improving the nation's cybersecurity to drive the ecosystem to patch known classes of vulnerabilities to secure, yada yada. Even if every vulnerability were to be fixed, the prevalence of undiscovered vulnerabilities across the software ecosystem would still present additional risk. So there's a lot of interesting things that we found out recently, okay? Again, this mostly happened while I was sick, so it's kind of hard to really talk about this. And also, it's not illegal. I just want you to know that I'm going to be targeted by somebody the moment that I talk about this. Probably. Basically, the Chinese government, I think, or maybe it was like a very specific contractor who was working with them. They were working on a lot of different tools to gain access unlawfully to various systems, right? And it got leaked. All of it got leaked, like every single one. And not just the systems themselves, but the data within those systems. So like actual like call logs and stuff. If you have a copy of that, you're okay. I do not have a copy of it. I do not. This is my life advice to you. If you ever see something appear that's illegal and you download it, they're going to find you. If it is a national security matter, you will have agents showing up at you. Not Asians. It's my accent. Although I mean you could. It is the Chinese government. Like you could. But my accents, man. Agents from the government will actually show up at your door, right? It is not something to play with. So if you ever see this stuff, don't download it. Read other people's assessments of it and hope that they have systems in the place to mitigate their risk, or hope that they're out of jurisdiction. Because the only people that I've ever seen do like a deep dive on the stuff, they were in entirely different places that were outside of this place's jurisdiction. A bunch of different systems were leaked. A bunch of different, data points that they gained using these systems were leaked. And effectively what the government is talking about here, the premise of undiscovered vulnerabilities, you may have heard under another term called 0 days. Boy oh boy, this company used a lot of them. They had ways of getting into every single device in the world without requiring like major changes to your system. For instance, like you didn't need like root access on your Android phone, which was usually what you needed to do to gain any kind of deep access to all systems. It just worked. They had it for iPhones, they had it for Apple iCloud, they had it for like everything. In that repository, there were call logs, and there were call logs from multiple different governments. We've known that this stuff has been used in a very adversarial way for a long time, but I think this also sort of opened the doors to like, oh, this is being used against everybody, and this is being used even if you're not a high value target. It's very scary to think about, but like that's the stuff that we don't know about until somebody leaks it. But if nobody ever leaks it, you'll never know. A proactive approach that focuses on eliminating entire classes of vulnerabilities reduces the potential attack surface and results in more reliable code, less downtime, and more predictable systems. Because as powerful as it is to be able to have, full control over your memory layout and stuff for like full performance, most people can't handle that kind of power. Oh, is this the Rust doc? It is. President Joe Biden saying that Rust officially is better than C++. I just want everyone to be clear about this. I think this is the only programming language that has gotten official presidential endorsement in its entire history. I'm pretty sure. I don't think a president has ever come out and said, I love C++. Like, I don't think a president has ever said that. But here, I'm assuming at some point, do they name drop Rust? They do! Look, they actually name drop it! Yo! Okay, well, we'll get there eventually. That's in like chapter 5. It's gonna be interesting, right? Because we spend so much time making these things, but ultimately places still don't use them. Because for them, it's like, okay, well, why bother? And they believe themselves to be able to write code so well that they're able to mitigate these problems. If you can write code really well and perfectly with C++ with the latest standards, you do basically get rid of all of these issues. Even if you write C++ like it's 1998, you're still able to do a lot of different things that will help mitigate these issues all the way down to like 0, right? But I'm going to tell you right now, there is barely a developer alive who can do that. As a developer, I know how easy it is to get into this state where your ego takes over and you believe that you're better than you actually are. I guarantee you, there is no way that you as a developer can beat the odds and make something that is perfectly free of any vulnerabilities. And the government agrees with me. Ultimately, this approach enables the United States to foster economic growth, accelerate technical innovation, and protect national security. And these are very, very important things because, again, technology companies as a whole have become very intertwined with a country's fabric of being. I don't know if that's necessarily true outside of the Western Hemisphere. I'm kind of an Americuck because I'm just stuck here. Like, Canada is basically America in the sense of like a lot of what we have is just American. So it's like there's not really a way for me to ignore it, and there's not a way for me to see it from a different lens. But that's what it feels like. Leaving these risks unmitigated comes with a costly price tag and may allow America's adversaries to attempt to take advantage of the circumstances. And we know that this is true by the recent leaks that I've just talked about. To further address these dynamics, President Biden signed the National Cybersecurity Strategy in March 2023. Holy shit, that was like a year ago. Wow. Setting forth an affirmative vision for cyberspace and imagining a new approach to solving these long-standing difficult problems. It calls for 2 shifts in how the United States allocates roles, responsibilities, and resources. Now, this is interesting. How the United States as a whole allocates roles, responsibilities, and resources. First strategy calls for the rebalancing responsibility to defend cyberspace to those most capable and best positioned to reduce risk for all, which I'm assuming they mean by the programmers themselves, which my job just got a lot harder. I don't want to work anymore. Second, it notes the need to realign incentives to favor the long-term investments required to make cyberspace more resilient and defensible in the years to come. No matter what they write in a book, in a story, no matter how crazy Cyberpunk 2077 gets, the truth is, it pales in comparison to what we have to do IRL to actually, handle what is life. And we're actually getting there now. Like, we're actually slowly moving towards a world where we are now dealing with cybersecurity stuff. And like, where it's like a huge major concern. And where it's like, we might be jacked into the system. And you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. The strategy recognizes a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make meaningful progress on these hard cyber problems in this decisive decade. This is a very strong statement. I actually really enjoy this bit of writing because this is
that kind of writing that is symbolic. The stance that they want to take is one that is saying like, okay, this is the turning point, right? And we can't wait any longer, because the problems are simply too much, and we can predict what the problems are going to be, and by the time we get to the future, it'll be too late. And it's also saying like, we are the only ones who can do this now, and we must set the standard now, because there's no way in hell in the future are we ever going to get consensus on this ever again. It's a very, very strong statement to make. I actually like this a lot. Since its publication, yada yada yada, you do stuff, get technological progeny of the strategy. Wait, the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy. Progeny of the strategy. This sounds nuts. This sounds like writing for like, you know, Halo or something. Lays out the plan for employers to grow their cyber workforce and educators to expand access to cyber training. I don't know if you guys have ever had to deal with this, but I had to do a review of like college classes and university classes. I was asked to sit in once to like review it, because like, you know, sometimes like universities will find people in the industry to sit down to be like, hey, like, would you like to review this stuff so we know that we're teaching our students well? And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. I never went to school, so I gotta take a free class. Let's go. And my god, some of these classes suck. Some of these classes really suck, okay? There are some really good like classes here, really good, but most of the time the classes that I sat in, I was like, I don't know if they're gonna come out with any usable skills. And mind you, this was like post-secondary. In general, I find most schooling for stuff that's very cutting edge, like technology, to be very behind unless you go to very specific classes. You need to shop around a lot. A lot of them suck. Yeah, exactly. Cybersecurity with AI and consciousness uploaded to the cloud with Neuralink. I don't even want to begin to imagine that. Can you imagine? Like, imagine one day, right? You upload your consciousness to, like, you know, the cyber cloud. What did Biden say? Biden said cyberspace, okay? Imagine, okay? You're there with Joe Biden in cyberspace, right? You're having a tea party. What do Americans drink? Probably sweet tea. Probably that, what's that tea from Panera Bread? Me and Biden, we're sitting up in cyberspace drinking charged lemonade, right? Getting 3 times our daily recommended dose of caffeine. Then all of a sudden, his face starts to, you know, blank out and there's error signs everywhere. Boom, I've been hacked. Me and Biden having sex in cyberspace. That's where AI is trending, right? Okay, listen, I can't think of a very good use for AI that isn't just going to be like worse. There's some use cases where it's like, if you're somebody who has the skills, but you want to take kind of a shortcut to being able to, like, say storyboard or like concept art, right? Then maybe I can see it. But the way that AI is done now and the way that AI is trending in like how people use it, people will always use it for the lowest common denominator thing. I don't doubt that that's going to be a reality very soon. If not already. Sorry, we got sidetracked. Where were we? Programmers, there we go. Okay, programmers. Okay, so this is where my job gets a lot harder. This is when I decide to retire. Programmers writing lines of code do not do so without consequence. Wow, that is a very powerful statement. Again, I need to emphasize here. There is no standard for what is a programmer. There is absolutely nothing that really defines what a programmer is. There's no requirements to be a programmer. Only in Canada does being a software engineer have a requirement of you having to go to an engineering class and thus the ethics courses. But you can still be a programmer, and which is effectively the same as a software engineer. But you don't have to go through any of that. You can skip ethics, you can skip safety, you can skip a whole bunch of things, right? You can just go right into it from your bedroom, which is both a great thing and a bad thing. The way they do their work is of critical importance to the national interest. The shift from reaction to strategic preparation highlights the enormous influence the technical community can have on the security of a shared digital ecosystem. This report articulates a dual approach. First, in order to reduce memory safety vulnerabilities at scale, creates a software and hardware can secure building blocks of cyberspace. Building blocks of cyberspace. Oh, I guess like, yeah, okay, like the basics. Like you have like a Lego piece that's like secured against like viruses. So if you use it over and over and over, it should be fine, yeah. This report focuses on the programming language, oh god, as a primary building block and explores hardware architecture, which is also very important actually. There's this whole, like, I'm sure most of you have like heard of Spectre, where like Spectre made your computer run 20% slower. So all the gamers in the world, gamers, we're being held back by cybersecurity. Gamers, we get 20% less performance because of cybersecurity. I don't care about the cyberspace, I care about cyberpunk. Second, in order to establish better cybersecurity quality metrics, your research community can adjust the hard and complex research form of software measurability, which right now, I'm not kidding you, a lot of places still use lines of code. This report explores shift, whatever. This work cannot be accomplished by government action alone. Now, this is a very, you know, key statement, and it's true. This has to come from like a very individual level as well, because the way that it's structured, the government does not have full control, right? Like it really is down to like everybody getting on board to the same thing. As memeable as this is, I kind of wish every programmer reads these reports, because it is important in the sense of like, this is ultimately about the ethics of your job and also about like what you can do to sort of like stay ahead of the coming tide, right? Because if not today, then maybe tomorrow. We'll have to change how we do things for the sake of the world to make it better. And there is a level of responsibility no matter what you do, but as a programmer, depending on what you work on as like a product, that level of responsibility rises and rises in terms of how much impact it can have on someone's life, both in a positive light or in a negative light. If I'm dealing with your payment information, for instance, it behooves me to read this stuff and take care in what it's being asked of me, and to think about ways to mitigate this stuff as well, and to read the latest research on this stuff, because I don't want you to go broke. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm still sick, so like things are hard. These approaches will be ambitious takings that require persistent, multi-sector focus. There are no silver bullets, but power comes through the alignment of today's resources with tomorrow's ask. God, who writes this? Whoever writes this, I want them to write more. I want to meet the people who like write these reports, because the way that they say things sounds so cool. You know what I mean? Like, with power comes through the alignment of today's resources with tomorrow's aspirations. The future prosperity and security of the digital ecosystem requires determined cooperation with the technical community. And then, you know, God Bless America starts like playing, and like the American flag like drops through your like spine or like something. To reduce the burden placed on end users from cybersecurity threats, efforts must be made to proactively eliminate entire categories of software vulnerabilities. CVEs, that I mentioned earlier, CVEs, and now we know what it means because I forgot what it means. Common vulnerability and exposures. And look, they even talk about C++. Okay, now we're starting to skim slowly. American bald eagle. I didn't know that there's a bald eagle emote. Holy shit. Experts have identified a few programming languages that both lack traits associated with memory safety. They also have high proliferation across children systems such as C and C++. This is the only site that you should be using is CPP reference. There's a lot of other sites like c++.com. That's a fake website. Look at the string copy. Unless you read this, you have no clue. Copies the character string pointed to by source, including the null terminator to the character array whose first element is pointed to by destination. The behavior is undefined if the dest array is not large enough. The behavior is also undefined if the strings overlap. So if they both occupy the same space in memory, and as well as if where you're putting it can't possibly hold whatever someone types in. It is literally a 5-line, it's 5 lines. It's 5 lines. There are some things that you can do to mitigate this. You can make like an array that's dynamically sized, but if you don't know how to do this, boo, error. Immediately. Buffer overflow, there's a memory issue. You're going to leak someone's credit card information. Also, somewhere, I'm not kidding you, somewhere on this site is a reference to Mugu Gaipan. I'm not even kidding you. Somewhere on this site, I forget where the example code is. There's a line of example code that references Mugu Gaipan. Well, I just wanted to make that clear. It's you are not a good enough programmer. Nobody is to be able to do this well. 5 lines to your demise. Exactly. Choosing to use memory-safe programming languages at the outset is recommended by the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agencies. Open source software security. Holy that's a long title. As recommended by CISA is one example of developing software in a secure by design manner. I'm assuming that at some point they're going to talk about Rust. This is talking about what a memory vulnerability is going to be. Let's go down to where they mentioned Rust, because this is the meme, okay? According to experts, both memory safe and memory unsafe programming languages meet these requirements. At this time, the most widely used language that meet all 3 properties. What properties? We need to go back, sorry. Over 50 years, how far do we have to go back to learn about what they're talking about? First, the language must allow the code to be close to the kernel so that it can tightly interact with both software and hardware. Second, the language must support determinism so the timing of the outputs are consistent. And third, the language must not have or be able to override the garbage collector, a function that automatically reclaims memory allocated by the computer program that is no longer in use. JavaScript programmers are in shambles. So this is why they mentioned Rust. At the time, the most widely used languages that meet all 3 properties are C and C++, which are not memory-safe programming languages. Rust, one example of a memory-safe programming language, has the 3 requisite properties above, but it's not yet been proven in space systems. I'm actually very surprised that the Rust section was so small. The meme of this document was everyone was talking about Rust. People were saying like, oh, Joe Biden endorses Rust. Or like C++ out, Rust in, you know what I mean? Like it's a 1 line. It's a 1 line reference to it. Why is everybody so... Programming feels like it is 99% memes. It has always felt like memes. Actually, I have one really good meme to show you all. So basically, they're talking about a Linux distribution called Solaris. And then this person from Spark Linux was talking about their like ports. And the person from Solaris was like talking about like, oh, like this is why we do things. Like Linux is lightweight, Solaris is a pig. One of the most critical things that contributes to performance is cache/TLB footprint. And it goes on and on and on for multiple pages, right? And at the very end, Brian Cantrell, in response to this giant technical, very technical reply, in a very technical forum, Brian Cantrell says, have you ever kissed a girl?